Orthomolecular medicine. And orthomolecular medicine is essentially the use of nutrients, hormones, and other things that occur naturally in the body to treat illness, chronic illness, acute illness, etc. Now, one of the biggest benefits, and this is similar to naturopathy. Naturopathy also uses herbs and things of that, herbs and sunlight and fasting and things of that nature. But the ultimate goal is to restore homeostasis in the body through these means, these more natural means than the pharmacological agents. Okay? So what I want to point out here is, what is the triage theory? Well, the triage theory, which was proven, and I'll show that later, the triage theory predicts that optimizing intake of roughly 40 essential micronutrients will reduce the risk of chronic diseases associated with aging and increased lifespan. If the theory is correct, incidences of these diseases might be reduced by an inexpensive intervention with micronutrients. Now let's repeat that. The triage theory predicts that optimizing intake of roughly 40 essential micronutrients, it's actually 90. I'm going to show you a thing from Dr. Joel Wallach, who I believe articulates this better. But the triage theory predicts that optimizing the intake of roughly 40 essential micronutrients will reduce the risk of chronic diseases associated with aging and increased lifespan. If the theory is correct, incidences of these diseases might be reduced by an inexpensive intervention of micronutrients. The triage theory posits that during evolution, as a result of periods of shortage of micronutrients required by various proteins for function, nature selects organisms capable of replacing their metabolism or rebalancing their metabolism. This rebalancing ensures survival of the organism at the expense of a healthy metabolic state, which results in the accumulation of insidious damage, leading to longer-term consequences mentioned above, including chronic diseases of aging. That nature may have developed such a system is logically consistent with the consensus that natural selection favors short-term survival for reproduction over long-term health. There is, for example, a known triage between organs. If you are short of iron, the body will take it from the liver before the heart, because if iron is taken from the heart, the body will die. Okay, and one of the long-term consequences is DNA damage, which is relatively unimportant when one is starving, but can result in cancer after a delay of 20 years. Vitamin K, an example of the triage theory, is a micronutrient inadequacy linked to diseases of aging. Okay, so the triage theory posits that some functions of micronutrients, approximately 40 essential vitamins, minerals, fatty acids, and amino acids, are restricted during shortage, and that functions required for short-term survival take precedence over those that are less essential. Insidious changes accumulate as a consequence of restriction, which increases the risk of diseases of aging. The 16 known vitamin K-dependent proteins we evaluated, meaning the people that did the research evaluated the relative lethality of 11 known mouse knockout mutants to categorize essentiality. Results indicate that 5 VKD proteins that are required for coagulation had critical functions, whereas the knockout. Okay, so it will cause bone fragility after estrogen loss. Arterial. A triage perspective reinforces recommendations of some experts that much of the population and warfarin coumadin may not receive sufficient vitamin K for optimal function. I want to be very sure that people understand that is vitamin K1, and the reason I want to make sure that people know it's vitamin K1 is a lot of people are taking vitamin K2. Now, vitamin K1, apparently there's no safe upper limit, okay? So this is what I want people to understand. Vitamin K1 you get from plants. Vitamin K2 you get from animal products. But with vitamin K1, what I want people to understand is no adverse effect has been reported for individuals consuming higher amounts of vitamin K, so a tolerable upper intake level was not established. But that's vitamin K1. I want to make sure people understand that. I'd like to use Dr. Bruce Ames to outline the triage theory of aging and disease, because I think he does a much better and more articulate way of explaining it than Dr. Ames, even though Dr. Ames discovered the triage theory of aging and disease. Prior to that, Dr. Bruce Ames has been talking about this with the 90 essential nutrients and also the need of these things to prevent aging and disease for many years. And I think he just articulates it much better. Dr. Wallach, not Dr. Ames, but Dr. Wallach is the co-discoverer of the science of epigenetics. Epigenetics is essentially how environment, such as nutrition, affects the expression of genes. And I'm going to let Dr. Wallach explain essentially the triage theory of aging and disease. However, not calling it the triage theory of aging and disease because Dr. Wallach was talking about this before Dr. Ames, actually.
The thing we learned in the animal industry over 100 years ago, that to maximize the longevity, maximize the genetic potential for production of milk and meat and eggs, to maximize health, we had to eliminate disease because we don't have health insurance for animals. If we used a human healthcare system for animals, it'd be sticker shock for most people. A dozen eggs would be $250, and a pound of hamburger would be $700 just to pay for the health care. So we learned a long time ago in the animal industry that we could prevent birth defects, we could prevent infertility, we could maximize longevity and health and fending off disease by giving all the known essential nutrients to animal based on body weight. And we learned 100 years ago that there are 16 minerals required, 16 vitamins, 12 amino acids, 3 fatty acids, and that's the 90. And you cannot depend on it from being in your food, because nutritional minerals, which make up 2/3 of the 90 essential nutrients, 60 out of the 90 are minerals, do not occur in a uniform blanket around the crust of the earth. They occur in veins like chocolate and chocolate ice cream, and some places have 10, some places have 15, some places have 20, some places have 40. Plants only need 3 to maximize their benefit and make good seeds for the next generation. Human beings and all other vertebrates, whether you're a hummingbird or a crocodile or an elephant, require 60 minerals. And so the only way you can guarantee that and actually prevent an enormous amount of unnecessary misery and cost is to consciously supplement with all 90 essential nutrients. It just seems so simple. You just guarantee it. And whatever you get from your food is a benefit added, is an add-on. But you can't depend what is or is not in the food. And we've learned that in the animal industry, and why not treat humans as well as we do animals?
Now, I want to be sure that people understand this. Going back to the 1930s and even the 1800s and things of that nature, it's not like the triage theory was not somewhat known almost instinctively by people that we needed to eat foods that were nutrient dense. Eating nutrient dense foods is the cornerstone of all of the blue zones and things of that nature. Now, Dr. Weston Price was a dentist. Now, I don't think he did the greatest science. I do think Ansel Keys is a much better scientist. But one of the things that all of the blue zones have in common is the consumption of very nutrient-dense diets, especially when you get to places like Okinawa and, Sardinia, places like that. You have very nutrient-dense diets. But I'm gonna let a couple key points of this documentary on Weston Price, and then I'm gonna move on. And I'm gonna do a whole video about this documentary, breaking it down.
Hey, I think that's a pretty good fine. Well, this fine boy, see this way. It's over here. You see it. How old are you? 40 years. A number of the teeth have decayed cavities in them. And that has happened because he's not eating enough fish or not getting enough milk. Say, you're a fine, big, strong fella. How old are you? You look as though you were a giant. My. Where'd you come from? Barbados. Well, that's the place. Did you eat lots of fish when you were a little boy?
Yes.
That's the stuff that makes good bodies. If everybody do that, the most universal disease in the world is the decay of the teeth. And unfortunately, we have not known the cause until we've gone to the primitive people to find how they prevent tooth decay. Our difficulty is that we are adding too much white flour and sugar and do not get enough of the foods that carry the minerals and vitamins. When the primitive people adopt the food of modern civilization, their teeth decay just as ours do.
Now that's very important to understand, because what that shows, like this was shown with the Okinawans and the Zulus. Okay, so what happened with the Zulus in Africa is they found two groups of Zulus, one living in a primitive type way off of their traditional diet, did very well. Those that adopted a more British diet with, refined flour and refined sugar and refined products did very poorly. That was not Dr. Price that discovered that. That was someone else that wrote a book called The Saccharine Sickness, which was about sugar. The other one that's important to understand is with the Okinawans. When Okinawans adopt Western-style eating, meaning more pork, more meat, less vegetables, they get sick. That's just what happens. They do not have the longevity that they once had. So this is Dr. Ansel Keys talking briefly about the origins of the Mediterranean diet. Now the thing is, what people don't understand is it's not just about micronutrients with orthomolecular medicine. It's also macronutrient balance and things of that nature. So diets like the Mediterranean diet, which is basically at the forefront, but there's other traditional eating patterns that I'll go over too. But these diets are what are at the forefront of nutrient density, as well as optimization of the right kinds of fat and the right macronutrients and the right balance of macronutrients. So this is what he's going to say here.
Populations observing the diet and perhaps attempting to do something like the diet that we saw around here, which at that time was almost vegetarian. They had fish, more fish then than now, and so that convinced us that we should make a study in other places as well. We went from here to a trial in real south of Italy, in the Cartera, and then from there to the island of Crete, and began the systematic study of the populations in Europe and then also in Japan. And all of this pointed to the importance of the diet. Other things also, of course, but that was the main thing. And when you speak about the diet, as I mentioned at that time anyway, the local diet, and what we thought was a good diet, was largely vegetarian. Fruits and vegetables and fish. Not many fish, actually. But that was what they lived on. We developed recipes, and we lived on it also. We liked it. So that's the story of the diet.
I was horrified to read in a guidebook years ago that coming to visit.
So this is Dr. Linus Pauling talking about preventing illness and diseases with vitamin C. People might know who Linus Pauling is. He had 2 Nobel Prizes, one in chemistry and one in peace. And here we go.
Various substances are normally present in the human body, and many of them required for life and care.
The reason I'm bringing this up is this is the birth of the term orthomolecular medicine.
Characterized by low toxicity, I call them orthomolecular substances. And I thought, here we have what the Food and Nutrition Board does, estimating the amount, the intake needed to keep you from dying. And that's the RDA. But you can also ask a question, what is the intake that will put you in the best of health? The most...
So the interesting thing is, people like Dr. Linus Pauling, Dr. Weston Price, Dr. Abram Hoffer, Dr. Joel Wallach, the question they want to ask is, so we have these things called nutrients, and there's a certain amount that keep you they help you survive. Now, what's the key difference between how much you need to survive and how much you need to thrive? And what's a safe level of those nutrients?
Active against disease. And when I looked through the medical nutritional literature to find out what this intake was, I found there was nothing in the literature about it. Practically nothing. Just a few papers had been written on this subject. And, well, how do you find out? It's a little hard. When people ask me, I say, if you still catch colds, you're not taking enough vitamin C. That's one way of finding out. It's interesting that for most vitamins, all animals require the substances exogenously. With little doubt, what happened was 600 million years ago, primitive animal was running around eating plants, his ancestors, these plants, and his biochemistry was very much like theirs. Here he was able to synthesize thiamine and riboflavin and pyridoxine and vitamin A, but he was eating the plants which synthesized them, and he was getting enough in his foods so that he really didn't need this apparatus, and he lost it.
So he's talking about his theory of why humans, guinea pigs, and fruit bats cannot function. We can't make our own vitamin C. That's why guinea pigs are used a lot in research that has to do with vitamin C, because they're one of the only other mammals. As I said, it's, and monkeys and great apes. But guinea pigs, fruit bats, monkeys, great apes, and humans, which are also a great ape, we all can't make our own vitamin C due to the fact that we rely on consumption of a lot of plants. This is another reason that it's pretty obvious that humans have always eaten a predominantly plant-centered diet to get a sufficient amount of vitamin C. You can get vitamin C in certain organ meats of animals and stuff, but as I noted in a previous video, that can lead to a lot of toxicity, particularly hypervitaminosis of vitamin A and vitamin D and things of that nature. So, meaning too much vitamin A and too much vitamin D.
And ever since then, all animals have required these various vitamins. This didn't happen with vitamin C. And why not? Presumably because there isn't enough vitamin C in the foods. And one reason that animals require more vitamin C than plants is that animals have collagen as their principal macromolecular molecule, a structural molecule.
So we need collagen, which requires vitamin C as a foundation. Like, that's why vitamin C prevents wrinkles, in case people are curious about that.
And plants use carbohydrate, polysaccharide, cellulose. So human beings can't synthesize collagen without using up vitamin C. They need more vitamin C than animals do, so they've kept on synthesizing it. Unfortunately, the common ancestor of all of the primates some 25 million years ago was living in a tropical valley where the food was so high in vitamin C that when a mutant came along who had lost the ability to make the enzyme that would produce the vitamin C, he had an advantage over the wild type, and the wild type died out, and since then all of the primates have had to get vitamin C exogenously. Most of them have had sense enough to stay in the tropics eating the...
So what that means is that we have to get our vitamin C, because we're a primate, we have to get our vitamin C from outside sources, meaning from our diet. That's exogenously, that's what that means.
Foods that are high in vitamin C, but man has moved out into temperate and subarctic areas and has changed his eating habits in such a way that practically all human beings are suffering from a sort of subclinical scurvy that is called ordinary good health, but should be called ordinary poor health. So we can ask, how much vitamin C do these animals manufacture? It's proportional to body weight. 70 kilograms of houseflies manufacture 10 grams of vitamin C per day. And in general, animals manufacture about 10 grams per day. It says here 2 to 20 grams per day per 70 kilogram body weight. That's 40 to 400 times RDA for humans. I might as well mention now that I take 300 times RDA, 18 grams of vitamin C per day, and 80 times RDA of vitamin E, and 25 times RDA of the B vitamins. Perhaps when I start getting old, I'll go up to 50 times. And 10 times RDA of vitamin A. It's interesting that the recommended amount of vitamin C for monkeys is 70 times that for human beings. Easy to understand that.
Take note that the RDA for monkeys is 70 times that of humans. Not denying, now scientists do not deny that humans are indeed primates, and this is where people like Dr. Joel Wallach, who's a veterinarian, why he understands things quite a bit better than many other physicians. Now, Dr. Wallach is both a naturopathic doctor and a veterinarian, so keep that in mind. Now, this is Dr. Pauling speaking, not Dr. Wallach, just so people know that.
Of course, monkeys are expensive, probably $1,000 each. I don't know, maybe $2,000 each, but we're still, if you've been spending the last year implanting electrodes in their brains and writing down things in the research book and then come in and the monkeys have died, that's a real tragedy. You can't publish a paper, you probably won't get tenure. And so they've worked very hard to find out what the optimum intake of vitamin C is for monkeys.
This is Dr. Pauling talking a little bit more about orthomolecular medicine. Now, this playlist is linked in the description if people want to watch the whole videos of these. Okay.
I was disappointed that the medical profession had not accepted, in the 10 years after the publication of my book, Vitamin C and the Common Cold, the fact that large doses of vitamin C do have value in controlling the common cold and also other diseases. Now 20 years have gone by, 23 years, and there are good signs that the value of high doses of vitamins is being accepted. I am disappointed that the United States National Academy of Sciences during the last 3 or 4 years has published several books on health, such as Health After the Age 50, in which a strong recommendation is made that people increase their intake of fruits and vegetables in order to get more of vitamin C, vitamin E, and beta-carotene, precursor of vitamin A, and have then gone on to say, but do not take vitamin supplements. And no reason is given.
Now, this is important that people understand this. A lot of people, there's a natural versus synthetic argument. Now, before I continue, I want to make sure people understand I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nurse, I'm not a chiropractor, I'm not a dietitian, I'm not a nutritionist, I'm not anything like that. And there will be a similar disclaimer in the description of this video. But what people need to understand, synthetic nutrients are the same thing as natural nutrients. It's just one is synthesized in an animal or a plant, and the other is synthesized in a laboratory, usually through genetically modified bacteria. Okay.
As to why people who want to improve their health should not take vitamin supplements. They're cheaper, and moreover, you can get real orthomolecular amounts with vitamin supplements.
People curious about this should really read a couple books. Dr. Dean Ward's Smart Drugs and Nutrients, and Dirk Pearson and Sandy Shaw's book, Life Extension, a Practical and Scientific Approach, to get a better understanding about the natural versus synthetic argument and why it's pretty much moronic.
Impossible, no matter how well you select your diet, to get these amounts.
Take note of that. It's almost impossible to get these higher levels regardless of how you select your diet.
Vitamin supplements, impossible, no matter how well you select your diet, to get these amounts from the food. So there's still something that needs to be done. And I think it will be done during the next 10 years.
Thank you, Professor Pauling. I think
I recommend that every person...
So what did Dr. Pauling recommend in regards to vitamin C?
Every adult take 3 grams of vitamin C per day.
That's not a huge amount. That's 3 1,000 milligram tablets. I take 4, 2 in the morning and 2 before bed. And I take extra with my branch chain amino acids. I take about, probably 6 to 8 grams a day, counting the amino acid drinks I take with an extra 2 grams or 3 grams of vitamin C in them.
Smaller amounts for children, proportional to body weight. That every person who is at risk for one reason or another from heart disease take perhaps not only the vitamin C, 5 or 6 grams of vitamin C per day, but also 2 grams or more of lysine per day. 2 grams may well be effective prophylactically for
lysine is an amino acid, in case people are unaware of that.
People who have not had.
Lysine helps in the manufacture of carnitine. Carnitine is very important for heart health.
Heart attacks, but larger amounts might be needed for people who are at greater risk for cardiovascular disease. So I believe that it should be possible, at any rate in the developed countries who are prosperous enough to be able to afford the rather small amounts of money needed for the vitamin C and lysine to get a large amount of prophylactic action against cardiovascular disease and against other diseases also, and an increase in the length of life, the length of the period of really good health, of well-being. So I am very optimistic about the future.
So that was Dr. Pauling. Now, what does Dr. Hoffer, the psychiatrist that treated schizophrenia with niacin and ascorbic acid, what does he take a day, do you think?
What do you have to lose? And I'm like, I got a daughter. I get emotional. I have a daughter.
Now, to be honest, this is in a previous video I did, but let's see, what does Dr. Abram Hoffer, the guy that treated schizophrenia with niacin and ascorbic acid and other nutrients, what does he take a day as far as supplements go? Now, some of these doses that he's talking about are quite high. I certainly would not suggest taking some of the doses, particularly the selenium he takes the amount of selenium he takes is very high. I wouldn't take that much selenium, and the vitamin D, I believe, if I remember correctly, is quite high. But let's see what Dr. Hoffer took every day. Now, people might go, oh, these people are old. These people are damn near 100 years old at this point.
This one is called B complex 100s. It contains all the B's in just about the right concentration. I take one a day. This is that very important selenium. They're 200 micrograms each, and I like it, so I take 3 a day. It's a very important antiviral agent. There's my favorite, niacin. These are 500 milligram tablets of niacin. This is a bottle of 500. And I take 3 of these 3 times a day. Vitamin C, especially made in the States by a friend of mine who owned his own company called Energen C. I take 2 grams a day. 2 pills at noon and 2 pills at supper time. Vitamin A, each one is 10,000. These are over the counter. I take 3 of those. So I'm taking 30,000 units of vitamin A every day. N-acetylcysteine called NAC. It helps the body make glutathione. It's a very important antioxidant. I take 1 gram, 2 of these 3 times a day. This one is coenzyme Q10. They're 100 milligrams each, and I take 3 of those a day. This is a very important muscle enzyme. It's good for cardiovascular disease. I use it against Parkinsonism, and it has other values too. I don't have those, but I take it to make sure I don't have them. Vitamin D, famous vitamin D. They're 1,000 units each, and I take 6 a day, whether I'm in the sun or not.
See, he should only be taking roughly about 3 of those a day, in my opinion. At the most, 5 of those a day if they're 1,000 milligrams. But that I wouldn't take a dose that high. I would probably take 2 or 3 of those a day. So like 2 or 3,000. I think it's international units with vitamin D. It might be measured in a different way. I forget off the top of my head. But I would not be taking a dose that high. So let's go.
Salmon oil for the essential fatty acids. They're 1 gram, and I take 2 a day. This is calcium magnesium. I take 2 a day. Zinc, very important. Zinc citrate. These are 50s, and I'm taking either 1 or 2.
Notice he mentions that it's zinc citrate. It's better to take that than the zinc oxide. For example, I mentioned this in a previous video. I take calcium citrate and magnesium citrate because they're better absorbed. Also, magnesium citrate is shown to work much better for the heart than other forms of magnesium.
Each day. Folic acid.
Folic acid is extremely important for genomic stability, and genomic stability is extremely important to retard the signs and symptoms of aging.
Yellow pill, these are 5 milligrams each. These are on prescription. And I don't write prescriptions anymore, but I have a supply from the past. I take 1 of these every day. Vitamin E, 400 units. This is the natural form. I take 1 in the morning, 1 at night. And the last one, alpha-lipoic acid, which protects the liver against all sorts of toxins.
Alpha-lipoic acid is extremely important for liver protection and liver detoxification, but it's also a very powerful antioxidant. It helps also to make you more sensitive to insulin and helps to protect against type 2 diabetes.
Toxic effects, very important. These are 200s. Yeah, these are 200. I take 3 a day. So that's the list.
One of my biggest inspirations when I first started learning about nutrition when I was about 10 or 11 years old was a woman named Adele Davis. And Adele Davis is a very important figure in nutrition. She was one of the first scientists that actually started writing books on nutrition. And I think she's very good, but people want to get all complicated with their diets. Now, she was also one of the first people to promote supplementation. But let's see what she says about diet, because people want to take, diet to like this level or that level. But let's see what she has to say about diet right here.
Adele, how did you first become interested in nutrition?
Actually, I came indirectly because I lived on an Indiana farm as a kid. And from the time I was 10 until 18, I was very, very active in 4-H clubs. And as a result of this...
So she was the product of the 4-H clubs, which is a wonderful thing. People that don't go, you should go to like a Grange fair or whatever and see the... 4-H is a wonderful program, I think. I think there needs to be more 4-H programs.
4-H club where we had a lot of roundups at Purdue University, and so I got very fond. All my sisters had gone to Indiana University, and the only thing they taught at Purdue was home economics. So I started out at home economics. Then I went on and got my hospital training in New York City as a dietitian. And I was very disillusioned by that because I was all full of idealism and how we could make people healthy with good nutrition. And the diets were just horrible. We fed people on 19 cents a day. If they got a gun in their hands, they could have shot us, I'm sure. But we didn't see the people. And so I didn't like that. I liked people too much.
Adele, I would say that nutrition is taken pretty much for granted in America. Why?
I'm not sure nutrition's taken for granted. The uninformed person will think that if they're not hungry, they're well nourished. I think that's perhaps what you mean.
That's a very big problem, is people do have this, still have this misconception that if they're not hungry or if their stomach is full, that they're taken care of, they're well nourished, they're healthy. It's obviously not the case.
Unfortunately, that isn't true. We have just an appalling amount of sickness in America now. We have millions of people have heart disease, millions have arthritis, 22 million have allergies, and there's so many millions of people with diseases. They've either got bad eyes, or we've got brain damage, or we have mentally defective so that they're in the hospitals. There's a tremendous number of people in hospital beds, even though they're putting people out on tranquilizers in hospital beds because of mental illness, which is turning out more and more and more to be a nutritional thing.
How much of that sickness would you say is nutritional?
I think that a very great deal of sickness is because of the refined foods. I think we're literally at the mercy of the unethical food, refined food people, the people who take all the minerals and vitamins out of the sugar, out of the flour, make hydrogenated fats rather than...
Now keep in mind, blackstrap molasses, which is a byproduct of sugar making, of sugarcane making white sugar. You can literally use blackstrap molasses as an iron supplement. There's so much iron in blackstrap molasses. So keep that in mind. That's unrefined, if you get what I'm saying. Or actually, I should say that's refined, but it's the byproduct. It's a concentrated byproduct of the sugar making that has all the nutrients in it. So blackstrap molasses is a decent, if you need iron in your diet, it's a decent source of iron.
Leave the natural good fats.
Are pediatricians and obstetricians trained in nutrition?
Some of the medical schools are beginning to give some work in nutrition, but none of it's adequate. Most of them have, but the tragedy is that they have such terrific power over the girls and over the women and the babies. For instance, I have yet to know a baby, unless it's nursed, who's on a good diet. I have never known a formula to be adequate.
You've written another book on disease and health, Let's Get Well.
Now, what's interesting is Dr. Wallach changed all that by taking the formula manufacturers to court and having them change their formulas so that, they had to put certain micronutrients in those formulas. Like she said, there was, at that time, this is the 60s, that this interview's taking place, there weren't any adequate formulas, and probably most of them still aren't. If you read the ingredients on formulas, a lot of them are just corn syrup.
Yes.
Can you really avoid disease through good nutrition?
Some you can and some you can't. A great deal. There's been much interesting work in the past in which native races who had no refined foods whatsoever have been investigated, and they found that there was tremendously good health. There was no heart disease, no cancer, no...
Notice she's mentioning that, like I mentioned the Zulus that were on the traditional African diet versus the ones that were on the British diet, and how the Zulus on the traditional African diet did much better than the ones that were on the refined diet of the British. And you saw in the Weston Price documentary, people that eat foods that are unrefined and the native foods before they consume the foods of commerce, they're much, 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 much more healthy than when they start eating the foods of commerce.
Diabetes, no gallbladder disease, no mental disease, no crime, no drugs, no alcoholism, and so on. And apparently, if our food were good, but our nutrients needed to build good health are being thrown away.
Why do you feel that most of the American public doesn't eat that way?
Because we've heard years and years and years of propaganda. We've been told that certain cereals build champions when it did not. You feed it to rats and they die, any of the cold cereals. We've been told that white bread builds strong bodies so many ways. Dr. Roger Williams took 10 or 12 different types of white bread, all so-called enriched, and fed it to rats. They all died in about 6 weeks, or almost all of them died. And he brought out that that time was when prisoners would be kept on bread and they thrived.
Adele, what's your recommendation for adult consumption of milk?
Well, I think adults would be much healthier if they had a whole quart of milk a day. For instance...
Now, you have to understand, at this time, I'm not a big fan of milk, obviously. I don't think milk is a particularly healthy food. But at that time, milk was a very good source of concentrated amino acids. If it was fortified with vitamin A and D, it had vitamin A and D in it, and it had calcium and things of that nature. Now, at that time also, a lot of bodybuilders would drink milk. Bernard McFadden was a big fan of milk. Milk does have, people might not want to admit it, but it does have a good amount of health benefits. It has some health drawbacks too, and there are better ways to get the nutrients in milk. But to be honest, to be quite honest, for the average person, it might be easier to drink milk, even though there are a lot of health drawbacks to milk. There are a lot of benefits to milk that some people might not want to admit, but there are, again, a lot of health drawbacks too.
Something like 6 million women with aching backs because their bones have been demineralized. Milk is one of your best sources of protein. I like to recommend at least a quart of milk a day to everybody. And it's the only good source of calcium. It's an excellent source of B2, which is an extremely important vitamin, I think.
But we've been told that milk is also a source of cholesterol, which is supposedly dangerous to the health.
Well, the cholesterol problem is there's a lot of misinformation on that, of course. And by physicians, again, because they haven't been trained in nutrition. Cholesterol is high only when the foods are so refined that we haven't the nutrients to utilize it well.
Are there any general rules that you can throw out to the public for keeping themselves healthy with good nutrition?
Yes, I gave that in quite a good deal of detail a while ago. Just natural foods. Whole grain bread, cereals, fruits, vegetables, milk, cheese, eggs.
It's that simple?
Yeah, it's that simple. There's nothing refined if you really want to build health.
Eat unrefined foods. What a concept.